Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm Luke. Today we're going to be discussing direct listings as a route a private company can take to go public. When you think about potential options a private company has, they can either IPO, they can go through a direct listing, or they can be acquired by another public company such as a SPAC. So yeah, today we're going to focus on direct listings. Let's get into it. Okay, so IPOs are the most common route for a private company who wants to go public. There's also a second similar route, but less common, and that is a direct listing. So direct listings are a less common alternative to an IPO, and they differ to the IPO route in two important ways. So the first way is that direct listings do not involve an underwriter. So there's no third party involved in a direct listing who purchases and helps market the shares. There's no new shares that are issued as well. So that's the two key points within the first bullet. So no underwriter, no investment bank involved in underwriting the shares, and also no new shares are issued. So no capital is raised. The company lists its existing shares on an exchange at a price determined by the market. So no new shares are issued, no new capital is raised by the company like what you would find in an IPO. Instead, the existing shares are listed on an exchange as they are at the prevailing market price. And that this differs to an IPO where the IPO price, the listing price, is set based on the demand by investors. So that's one of the key points that contrasts a direct listing to an IPO. In an IPO, new capital was raised in exchange for new equity, which is provided to new or existing shareholders, where in a direct listing, no new shares are issued, so no new capital is raised by the company. The second point, and the second differential between an IPO and a direct listing, is that the shares only become available to the investing public when they are sold by existing shareholders. Whereas in an IPO, new shares are created and immediately distributed to new shareholders. So because in a direct listing no new shares are being issued, buyers of the stock would need to wait until existing shareholders are ready to sell their stock. So in an IPO, the company is issuing new shares which new or existing shareholders can subscribe to purchase. So there's new equity becoming available, whereas in a direct listing, because no new shares are being issued, buyers can only purchase stock in the company once sellers are ready to sell down their stock. So that's the second differential between an IPO and a direct listing. Some other points here. A direct listing is an appropriate route to going public if the company does not want to raise any new capital as part of the process. So if the company doesn't need new cash to fund any new growth projects, then a direct listing is more appropriate. And also if they do not want to dilute existing shareholders. So one of the characteristics of an IPO is that existing shareholders may be diluted as part of the process. Because you're introducing new shareholders into the company as part of the IPO, there's the potential for dilution of the existing shareholders, which may make them unhappy. Whereas a direct listing avoids this. You don't dilute the existing shareholders. They can still retain their stock and their ownership position in the company. Post direct listing, nothing really changes. If they are happy with their shareholding in the company, their ownership stake remains exactly the same. Whereas an IPO, in contrast, can dilute existing shareholders if new shareholders are added. The process for a direct listing can be undertaken faster than an IPO and at a lower cost, as underwriters aren't required. So direct listings are quicker, they're cheaper, there's less red tape to get through, but you may still require investment banks to provide advice and support with the regulatory process. So you won't require an investment bank to underwrite the shares because you're not issuing any new shares. So that will save on costs, but you may still hire an advisor to help support with the direct listing process, and also sort of any regulatory filings that need undertaking. You'll probably need advice to support with those items. But in totality, direct listings are faster, you can undertake them quicker, and they're also typically cheaper than a traditional IPO. They're typically undertaken by larger, more recognised companies, so companies that already have a recognised brand within the public market, good candidates for direct listings. So in the last few years, we've had Slack and Spotify. They're big names that have undertaken a direct listing as opposed to an IPO. So there is a clear market for this route, but they are bigger brand names, already got recognition, large shareholder bases, and they went public via a direct listing as opposed to an IPO. Okay, let's quickly contrast a direct listing to an IPO schematically. We'll have a look at the shareholder base, both before any public listing takes place, and then also what the shareholder base would look like post-IPO versus post-direct listing. And hopefully that should make everything crystal clear as to the nuances between those two routes to going public. So let's first start with the IPO. I've done this sketch before in my IPO video, but just in case you haven't seen it before. So pre-IPO, you have a company which is private and it's privately owned, and that's owned by the existing shareholders. So the pre-IPO shareholders will own 100% of the private company. And then post-IPO, the company is no longer private, it becomes public, and it's owned by a blend of the existing shareholders and the new shareholders, depending on how much new equity was issued. So the existing shareholders, assuming they were diluted, will now own less than 100% of the company, and the new shareholders will own a certain percentage of the company. And in exchange for that new equity that's been issued, the new shareholders will provide capital. So that's how an IPO works. The existing shareholders are diluted, new shareholders are added typically, and those new shareholders provide equity capital to the business. Now, let's contrast that with what happens in a direct listing. So, again, the company goes from private to public. Nothing changes there. And the shareholder base remains exactly the same. So no new shareholders are added. The shareholder base just remains identical to what it was pre-IPO or pre-direct listing. And the ownership remains at 100%. So no new shareholders are added, no new capital is provided. The only difference is the company is now public. So the shares are trading on a listed exchange. There's price transparency, volume transparency, and no new capital is provided either. That's the other key distinction. In an IPO, the new shareholders provide new capital. In a direct listing, no new shares are issued, so no new capital is provided. The only difference is that the company is now public. The shareholders can sell down their stake in the company if they wish to the general public, buyers of the stock, public market investors. The shares are now liquid and no new capital is provided. That's really the key distinction between an IPO and a direct listing. I think this sketch kind of illustrates simply the key differences between an IPO and a listing. The provision of capital differs and the introduction of new shareholders as part of the process. In an IPO, both those things take place. In a direct listing, neither of those things take place. No new capital is provided, no new shareholders are introduced. That's the differences. So yeah, that's a direct listing. That's contrasting it with an IPO. Hopefully that was clear. I'm about to film a video which explains a special purpose acquisition company. So the third route to becoming public, which is being acquired by a SPAC. So stick around if you want to understand how that all works. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video.